They stripped her of everything, her name, her honor, her home. The Pack Council stood in judgment, their eyes cold as winter stone, and declared Arden Vale guilty by association. Her husband, they said, was a traitor, and so she would be erased, cast into the frozen wastes where wolves go to die, where the forest swallows the weak and spits out bones. They wanted her gone, silenced, forgotten. But Arden Vale refused to disappear. In the place meant to be her grave, she found something they never expected: power, sleeping beneath ancient stone, waiting for hands desperate enough to claim it. This is her story. Stay until the end to see how the exiled become the reckoning. Drop a like and tell us what city you're watching from. The wind cut like broken glass. Arden Vale stood at the edge of the clearing, wrists bound with coarse rope, surrounded by 12 members of the Grey March Pack. Their faces were masks of stone, some satisfied, others indifferent, a few openly pleased. Behind her, the settlement she'd called home for 6 years was already shrinking into the tree line, smoke rising from cook fires she would never tend again. Elder Torvin stepped forward, his silver beard crusted with ice. He carried the judgment rod, an ancient piece of blackened wood carved with the names of the condemned. Arden Vale, he said, his voice carrying across the frozen ground, widow of Matthias Val, who betrayed the trust of this pack and sold our secrets to enemies beyond the border. By the law of blood bond, you share his guilt. By the law of exile, you are cast out. Arden said nothing. Her jaw was clenched so tight her teeth ached. You will be taken to the hollows, Torvin continued. You will be given one blade, one cloak, and nothing more. If the land spares you, that is the land's mercy. If it does not— He paused, letting the silence do the work. Then justice is served. A younger wolf, barely 20, spat into the snow near her feet. Traitor's whore, he muttered. Arden's eyes snapped to him, and for just a moment the boy flinched. There was something in her gaze that hadn't been there a month ago, something sharp and unbroken. Move, commanded Saren, the pack's lead enforcer. He shoved her forward, and the procession began. They marched for hours. The forest thickened around them, pine and frost and the smell of old rot. No one spoke. The only sounds were boots crunching through snow and the occasional cry of a distant bird. Arden's hands were numb, her breath shallow. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, refusing to stumble, refusing to give them the satisfaction. The hollows appeared just before dusk. It was a jagged wound in the landscape, a collapsed stone structure half buried in the hillside, surrounded by dead trees that twisted like claws. The air here was colder, heavier. Even the enforcers kept their distance from the ruin itself. Saren cut the rope from her wrists and tossed a small pack at her feet. Inside, a wool cloak, fraying at the edges. A hunting knife with a chipped blade. A single flint striker. This is where you stay, Saren said flatly. If you try to follow us back, we'll kill you. If you head north, the warlords will. East or west, the cold will. Your only chance is south, deeper into the wild. But nothing lives there long. Arden picked up the pack without looking at him. Torvin stepped forward one last time. Your husband's name is struck from our history. Your bloodline ends here. You are no one. She met his eyes. Then you have nothing left to take. The old man's face twitched, just a flicker of something that might have been unease. Then he turned, and the pack followed. Within minutes, they were gone. Mramt. Arden stood alone in the clearing, the wind pulling at her hair. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of red and gold. She looked at the ruin. The hollows, they'd called it. Crumbling stone walls, a sagging roof of rotted timber, darkness pooling in the gaps like water. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from rage. She wanted to scream, wanted to chase them down and make them hear the truth. That Matthias had been loyal, that he'd discovered something, that he'd tried to warn the council before they silenced him. But screaming into the wind wouldn't change anything, and chasing ghosts wouldn't keep her alive. So instead, she did the only thing that made sense. She walked toward the ruin. The entrance was a gap in the stone, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, the air was stale and damp, smelling of moss and old earth. Arden pulled the cloak tighter and stepped in. The interior was larger than it looked from outside, a single vaulted chamber with walls that had once been carved with intricate patterns, now worn smooth by time. The floor was uneven, littered with stones and debris. In the center, a stone altar or platform sat half-collapsed, its surface cracked and tilted. Arden set down her pack and exhaled slowly. Her breath misted in the cold. "All right," she whispered to herself. "All right." She spent the next hour clearing a corner of the space, pushing debris aside until she had a flat patch of ground. She spread the cloak out as a barrier against the cold stone, then sat and took stock. One knife, one striker, one cloak, and a forest full of things that wanted her dead. The first night was the worst. Arden didn't sleep. She sat with her back against the wall, knife in hand, listening to every sound. The wind howled through cracks in the stone. Something rustled in the trees outside. Foxes, maybe, or something worse. Her stomach was a knot of hunger and fear, but she didn't move. When dawn finally came, pale and gray, she stood and walked outside. The world was white and silent. Snow had fallen during the night, covering her tracks, covering everything. For a moment, Arden felt the weight of it, the enormity of being alone, truly alone in a place designed to kill her. Then she pushed the feeling down and got to work. Survival, she quickly learned, was a series of small, relentless tasks. First, water. She found a stream a quarter-mile from the ruin, half frozen but flowing. She broke the ice with a rock and filled her cupped hands, drinking until her teeth ached. Second, fire. It took her an hour to gather dry wood from beneath the snow, another hour to coax a flame from the flint striker. Her fingers were raw and bleeding by the time the kindling caught, but when it did, she felt a savage satisfaction. Third, shelter. The hollows would keep the wind off, but it wouldn't keep her warm. She spent 2 days dragging deadfall and branches to the ruin, weaving them into a rough lean-to inside the main chamber. It was ugly and unstable, but it trapped heat. Fourth, food. This was harder. She set snares using strips of cloth torn from the hem of her cloak, placed them near animal trails she'd spotted. For 3 days, she caught nothing. On the fourth day, she found a rabbit, frozen stiff in the wire. She skinned it with shaking hands, cooked it over the fire, and ate every scrap of meat, even the organs. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Days blurred together. She lost count. Time became a rhythm. Wake, gather, hunt, eat, sleep. Her body grew leaner, harder. Her hands, once soft from settlement life, became calloused and scarred. She learned to move quietly through the snow, to read the forest's moods, to recognize the difference between the rustle of wind and the movement of prey. And slowly, against all logic, she began to feel something she hadn't expected. She began to feel alive. It was on the 15th night, or maybe the 20th, she wasn't sure, that Arden found the chamber. She'd been exploring the ruin more thoroughly, looking for stones to reinforce her shelter. In the back corner of the main room, hidden behind a fall of rubble, she noticed a gap in the wall. When she pulled the stones away, cold air rushed out, carrying a smell like old metal. Behind the rubble was a doorway, and beyond the doorway, stairs leading down. Arden hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave it alone. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, won out. She grabbed a burning branch from her fire and stepped through. The stairs were steep and narrow, carved directly into the bedrock. They descended for what felt like minutes, spiraling down into darkness. Arden's firelight flickered off damp stone walls, and she could hear water dripping somewhere below. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a small chamber. It was circular, no more than 20 feet across. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols and glyphs she didn't recognize, layered over each other in dense, chaotic patterns. In the center of the room was a raised platform, and on the platform was something that made her breath catch. A circle of stones, each one the size of her fist, arranged in a perfect ring. And in the center of the circle, carved into the floor itself, was a symbol that glowed faintly with pale blue light. Arden stepped closer, her heart pounding. The glow pulsed, slow, rhythmic, like breathing. She knelt beside the circle and reached out, her fingers hovering just above the glowing symbol. "What are you?" she whispered. The light flared, pain exploded through her hand, up her arm, into her chest. Arden gasped and tried to pull away, but her hand was locked in place, fused to the stone by invisible force. The light grew brighter, searing, and she could feel something pouring into her, something vast and ancient and furious. Images flooded her mind. A forest burning, wolves running, a woman standing in the flames, her eyes blazing with the same blue light. Words in a language Arden didn't know, but somehow understood. We are the forgotten, we are the buried, we are the reckoning. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Arden collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping for air. Her hand was smoking faintly, the skin unmarked but tingling with residual energy. The glow in the floor had faded to a dim pulse. She lay there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. When she finally stood, her legs were shaking, but there was something else, something new. She felt different, stronger. Her senses were sharper. She could hear the drip of water echoing from 3 chambers away. She could smell the cold stone, the burnt wood of her torch, the faint metallic tang of the runes. And when she looked down at her hands, she saw faint lines of blue light tracing just beneath her skin, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "What did you do to me?" she whispered to the empty room. The runes didn't answer, but somewhere deep inside, Arden felt the stirring of something that had been asleep for a very long time. Power. One. She climbed back to the surface in a daze, her mind spinning. The fire in the main chamber had burned low. She fed it more wood, then sat and stared into the flames. Her hand still tingled. The faint blue lines had faded, but she could feel them there, just under the surface, waiting. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Hope. For weeks, she'd been fighting just to survive. Every day was a battle against cold, hunger, exhaustion. But now she had something they didn't expect, something they didn't know about. She didn't understand it yet, didn't know what it could do or what it would cost. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to die here. The next morning, Arden began to experiment. She started small, trying to summon the light she'd seen in the chamber below. She sat cross-legged on the stone floor, closed her eyes, and focused on the memory of that searing blue glow. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just as frustration began to set in, she felt it, a flicker of warmth in her chest, spreading down her arms. She opened her eyes and saw faint light tracing the veins in her hands. It lasted only a few seconds before fading, but it was enough. She tried again, and again. Each time, the light came a little easier, lasted a little longer. By the end of the day, she could hold it for nearly a minute, and the warmth it brought was enough to chase the chill from her fingers. But it wasn't just the light. Her body was changing too. She noticed it first when she went to check her snares. The walk that used to leave her breathless now felt easy. Her legs were stronger, her movements quicker. When a branch snapped under her foot, she reacted without thinking, twisting aside, hand going to her knife, senses flaring. She'd moved faster than she'd ever moved in her life. That night she tested herself. She ran through the forest, leaping over roots and dodging trees, pushing her body harder than she'd thought possible. She didn't tire, didn't stumble. It was like something inside her had been unlocked, and now it was pouring out, remaking her from the inside. By the time she returned to the hollows, she was breathless. Not from exhaustion, but from exhilaration. She was becoming something more. So, winter deepened. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Snow piled high against the ruin, and the forest became a labyrinth of white silence. Arden adapted. She built a second shelter outside the hollows, a crude cabin from fallen timber and stripped bark. It took her weeks of brutal labor, cutting, hauling, stacking, but when it was done, she had a space that was hers, walls that held heat, a roof that didn't leak, a door she could bar from the inside. She expanded her snare lines, ranging farther into the forest. She learned to fish through the ice, to track deer, to recognize which plants were edible even in winter. Her body continued to change, muscles hardening, reflexes sharpening, senses expanding. The blue light came more easily now, and she'd learned to channel it in small ways. A touch to warm her hands, a pulse to see in the dark. She didn't know what she was becoming, but she knew she was no longer the woman they'd exiled. One night, sitting by her fire, she thought about Matthias. She hadn't let herself do that in weeks. The grief was too raw, the anger too sharp. But now, wrapped in furs she'd cured herself, eating meat she'd hunted herself, she allowed the memories to surface. She remembered his laugh, the way he'd looked at her on their bonding day, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, the way he'd held her when the nightmares came. And she remembered the last time she'd seen him, chained in the council hall, bloodied and defiant, shouting that they were wrong, that he'd found proof, that they had to listen. They hadn't listened. They'd dragged him away, and 3 days later, they'd told her he was dead, executed for treason. And she'd been too broken, too numb to fight back. But she wasn't numb anymore. Arden stood and walked to the door of her cabin. She pushed it open and looked out at the frozen forest, the stars cold and clear above. "I'm still here," she said aloud, her voice steady. "I'm still here, and I'm not finished." The wind carried her words away into the night. Looked up. On the 43rd day, she'd started keeping count again, scratching marks into the cabin wall. Arden saw the smoke. It was mid-morning, and she was checking her northern snare line when she smelled it, wood smoke, faint but distinct, coming from deeper in the forest. Someone was out there. Her first instinct was to run. The pack had made it clear, if she returned, they'd kill her. If anyone found her, they'd finish what exile had started. But then she thought about the chamber below the hollows, about the power growing inside her, about the fact that she'd survived nearly 2 months in a place meant to be a death sentence. She wasn't prey anymore. Arden circled downwind, moving silently through the trees. The smoke grew stronger. After a quarter mile, she heard voices, low, male, speaking in clipped northern accents. She crept to the edge of a small clearing and peered through the undergrowth. 3 men sat around a fire, dressed in heavy furs and leather armor. Their weapons, axes, swords, long knives, were well maintained and close at hand. These weren't settlers, they were warriors, and standing slightly apart from them, arms crossed, was a fourth figure. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair tied back and a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. He wore no armor, just a plain wool coat and boots, but there was something about the way he stood, calm, alert, utterly still, that marked him as dangerous. "We're too far south," one of the seated men was saying. "Grey March patrols won't come this deep, but we're wasting time." "We wait," the tall man said. His voice was deep, controlled. "The information was solid. If there's someone out here, we find them. And if there's not, then we move on." Arden's pulse quickened. They were looking for someone, and given where they were, there was only one person they could mean. Her. She began to back away, moving slowly, careful not to snap a twig or disturb the snow. She made it 3 steps before the tall man's head snapped toward her. "There," he said quietly. The other men were on their feet instantly, weapons drawn. Arden turned and ran. She heard them crashing through the forest behind her, shouting to each other, spreading out to cut her off. But she was faster now, faster than she had any right to be. She dodged trees, vaulted fallen logs, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She almost made it. A figure stepped out from behind a pine directly in front of her, axe raised. Arden twisted aside, but her foot caught on a root and she went down hard, sprawling in the snow. The man loomed over her, axe gleaming. Then a voice cut through the trees. "Hold!" The tall man stepped into view, his eyes locked on Arden. The others froze, waiting. He approached slowly, hands open, non-threatening. When he was a few feet away, he crouched down so they were at eye level. "Arden Vale?" he asked. She didn't answer, her hand inching toward the knife at her belt. "My name is Cale Thorne," he continued. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because your husband sent me a message before he died." Arden went very still. "You're lying," she whispered. "He told me about the corruption in Grey March, about the council taking bribes from raiders, about evidence he'd hidden." Cale's eyes were steady, unflinching. "He told me that if anything happened to him, I should find his wife. He said you'd know what to do." Tears burned in Arden's eyes, but she blinked them back. "He's dead. They killed him. I know, and I'm sorry." Cale stood and offered her his hand. "But if you want justice, if you want to make them pay for what they did, then you need to come with me." Arden looked at his hand, at the men standing behind him, weapons lowered but ready, at the forest around her, the place that had tried to kill her and failed. She thought about Matthias. about the truth buried with him, about the power sleeping in her veins. And she made her choice. She took Kael's hand and stood. "Tell me everything," she said. Kael smiled, a grim, dangerous expression. "Walk with me." What? They returned to the clearing and the men relaxed fractionally. Arden sat by the fire, and Kael sat across from her. The others kept watch at the perimeter. 3 months ago, Kael began, your husband came to me in the Northern Territories. He said he'd discovered that members of the Grey March Council were taking payments from a raider clan in exchange for safe passage through Packlands. He had proof, ledgers, correspondence, names. Why didn't he go to the council? Arden asked, though she already knew the answer. Because the council was involved. Going to them was suicide. Kael's jaw tightened. He tried anyway. And they killed him for it. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Because the raiders he was talking about killed my family 2 years ago. Kael's voice was flat, emotionless. If Grey March is protecting them, then Grey March is complicit. I want them to answer for that. Arden stared into the fire, her mind racing. What do you want from me? Matthias told me he gave you something. A location. A key. He didn't tell me what, said it was safer if I didn't know. But he said if I found you, you'd have it. Arden's breath caught. She remembered now, the last night before Matthias was taken. He'd come to her in the dark, pressed something into her hand, whispered urgently, If they come for me, don't fight. Just survive. And when you're ready, go to the place we found the silver moss. I left something there. Use it. She'd thought he was being paranoid. She'd buried what he'd given her and tried to forget. But now... I know where it is, she said slowly. But I don't know what it is. Then we find out. Kael leaned forward. But I'm not going to lie to you, Arden. The council wants you dead. If we go back to Grey March, it'll be a fight, and I don't know if we'll win. Arden looked down at her hands. In the firelight, she could just barely see the faint tracery of blue beneath her skin. I'm not going back as a victim, she said quietly. If I go back, it's to finish this. Kael studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, recognition, maybe, or respect. Good, he said. Then let's get to work. They spent the next week at Arden's cabin. Kael's men, 3 northern rangers named Braun, Tariq, and Vira, were wary of her at first, but they warmed when they saw how she moved through the forest, how she'd built shelter from nothing, how she didn't flinch from hard work. Kael himself was harder to read. He was quiet, methodical, always watching. But when he spoke with purpose. And when he trained, which he did every morning, running drills with his blade, Arden saw the controlled violence in every movement. On the 3rd day, she asked him to teach her. He raised an eyebrow. You know how to fight? I know how to survive, she said. But I need to know how to win. He considered her, then nodded. Show me what you've got. They sparred in the clearing outside her cabin. Arden was faster than he expected, faster than she should have been. But her technique was raw, instinctive. Kael corrected her stance, her grip, the way she moved her weight. You're strong, he said after an hour, breathing hard. Stronger than you should be. Arden hesitated, then made a decision. She held out her hand and focused. Blue light flared along her veins, casting sharp shadows. Kael went very still. What is that? I don't know, she admitted. I found something in the ruins. It changed me. Changed you how? I'm faster, stronger. I heal quicker, and I can do this. She closed her fist, and the light pulsed brighter, warm against the cold. Kyle stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Good, he said. We're going to need every advantage we can get. Check. On the 7th day they set out. Arden led them south and east to a narrow ravine she and Matthias had explored years ago. It took them 2 days of hard travel through deep snow, but when they arrived, the place was exactly as she remembered. Stone walls draped with silver moss, a hidden alcove behind a frozen waterfall. She climbed into the alcove and began digging through the snow and ice. Her fingers found metal, a small iron box sealed with wax. She brought it into the light and broke the seal. Inside were 3 things: a journal filled with Matthias's careful handwriting, a leather pouch containing what looked like silver coins, each stamped with a Raider clan mark, and a map showing routes through Greymarch territory with dates and notations. Cale read over her shoulder, his face darkening with every page. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is enough to bring them down." Arden closed the journal, her hands trembling. "Then we go back." "Not yet." Cale looked at her seriously. "If we walk into Greymarch now, they'll kill us before we get 10 feet. We need a plan. We need allies. And you," he gestured at the faint glow still lingering under her skin, "you need to learn how to use that." Arden met his eyes. "Then teach me." "I'm not a mage, Arden. I don't know what that power is or where it comes from." "Then I'll figure it out," her voice was steel. "But I'm not waiting, not anymore." Cale held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We train. Hard. And when you're ready, when we're both ready, we make them answer for what they've done." Arden looked down at the journal in her hands, at the evidence her husband had died to protect. And for the first time since the exile, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever. She felt ready. The northern camp was nothing like Greymarch. No walls, no permanent structures, just a cluster of hide tents pitched in a clearing surrounded by sentinel pines. Smoke from cook fires drifted through the trees, and the air smelled of roasted meat and pine resin. When Arden arrived with Kael and his rangers, 20 pairs of eyes turned to watch her, and not one of them looked friendly. "You brought an exile?" A woman with braided red hair stepped forward, hand on the axe at her belt. "Are you out of your mind, Thorn?" "She's Matthias Vale's widow," Kael said evenly, "and she has the evidence we need." "She's Greymarch trash," the woman spat. "Her pack threw her out for a reason." Arden felt the old shame rise in her chest, hot and familiar. But she pushed it down and met the woman's glare without flinching. "My pack lied," she said quietly. "They killed my husband because he found proof they were selling out to raiders. And if you're smart, you'll want to see what he died protecting." The woman's eyes narrowed, but Kael stepped between them before the confrontation could escalate. "Ryla, enough," he said. "We're here for the same reason, to stop the people who killed your brother. Arden's husband was trying to do that. Show some respect." Ryla's jaw worked, but she stepped back. "Fine. But if this is a waste of time, she's gone. I don't care what you say." Cale nodded once, then gestured for Arden to follow him to the largest tent. Inside, a group of fighters sat around a low table covered in maps and weapons. They looked up as Kael entered, and their conversation died. "This is Arden Vale," Kael announced. "She has information that confirms what we suspected about Greymarch." He placed Matthias's journal on the table and opened it to the marked pages. The group leaned in, scanning the careful notations, dates, routes, payments, names. A grizzled man with a scar across his throat whistled low. "If this is real, half the Greymarch Council is dirty." "It's real," Arden said. "My husband documented everything before they killed him." "And you've been carrying this around for months?" Ryla's voice dripped with skepticism. "Convenient. I've been surviving in the hollows for months," Arden shot back. "They exiled me to die. I didn't know what Matthias left until a week ago." Ryla opened her mouth to argue, but the scarred man raised a hand. "Doesn't matter how long she's had it. What matters is what we do with it now." Kael nodded. "Agreed. But we can't just walk into Greymarch and demand justice. They'll kill us before we get through the gates." "Then what do you suggest?" Ryla asked. Kael looked at Arden, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. "We need leverage. Something that forces the council to listen instead of attack." "Like what?" the scarred man asked. "Like proof they can't ignore," Arden said slowly. "Public proof. If we expose them in front of witnesses, other packs, neutral parties, they can't just make us disappear." Kael's expression shifted, something like approval flickering across his face. "The Winter Gathering." The scarred man straightened. "That's in 3 weeks." "Exactly. Every major pack sends delegates. If we present the evidence there, in front of everyone, Greymarch can't bury it." Ryla crossed her arms. "And you think they'll just let us walk in and accuse them?" "No," Kael said flatly. which is why we need to be ready for a fight." The tent fell silent. Then Arden spoke, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." The training began the next morning. Kael woke her before dawn, dragging her out of the small tent they'd given her and into the freezing pre-dawn darkness. The camp was still asleep, the fires reduced to glowing embers. "Run," Kael said, and took off into the forest. Arden followed, her breath misting in the cold. At first she struggled to keep up. Kael was fast, his movements efficient and practiced. But as the minutes passed, she felt the power inside her wake up, spreading warmth through her limbs. Her strides lengthened, her breathing evened out. By the time they circled back to camp, she was running beside him, not behind. Kael glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You're faster than yesterday." "I told you," she panted. "I'm different now." "Show me how different." He led her to a clearing and drew his sword, a long, single-edged blade with a wrapped leather grip. He tossed her a practice weapon, a wooden replica weighted to feel real. "Come at me," he said. Arden hesitated for half a second, then lunged. Kael sidestepped easily, his blade tapping her ribs. "Again!" She attacked again, and again. Each time he was faster, reading her movements before she made them. Frustration burned in her chest, and she felt the blue light flicker beneath her skin. "Use it," Kael said, as if reading her mind. "Whatever that power is, use it." Arden gritted her teeth and focused. The light surged, and suddenly the world sharpened. She could see the tension in Kael's shoulders, the shift of his weight, the micro-adjustments in his grip. She struck, faster than before, and her blade actually connected with his, a glancing blow, but contact. Kael grinned. "Better." They sparred for an hour, and by the end, Arden's arms were shaking and sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cold. But she'd landed 3 hits, 3 more than she'd ever managed before. "You're learning," Kael said, sheathing his sword. "But you're still thinking too much. Trust your instincts. That power inside you, it knows what to do. Let it." Arden nodded, too exhausted to speak. Over the next 2 weeks, the training intensified. Kael drilled her in sword work, knife fighting, hand-to-hand combat. The other rangers watched with varying degrees of skepticism, but even Ryla had to admit Arden was improving at an unnatural rate. "It's not normal," Ryla muttered one evening, watching Arden spar with Vyra. "People don't get that strong that fast." "No," Kael agreed. "They don't." "So what is she?" Kael didn't answer, but his eyes never left Arden. At night, when the camp slept, Arden returned to the hollows. She told Kael she needed to practice in private, and he hadn't questioned it. The truth was, she needed to understand the power growing inside her, and the only place she felt connected to it was the chamber beneath the ruin. She descended the stone stairs, her breath echoing in the narrow passage, and entered the circular room with the glowing runes. The symbols pulsed faintly in the darkness, welcoming her. Arden knelt in the center of the circle and closed her eyes. The first time she'd touched the runes, the power had flooded into her violently, overwhelming and terrifying. But now she reached for it deliberately, carefully. She visualized the blue light as a thread, and she pulled. The warmth spread through her body, slower this time, more controlled. She opened her eyes and watched as the light traced patterns along her arms, her hands, brighter than before. She focused, trying to shape it, to direct it. The light flickered, then condensed into a small sphere hovering above her palm. Arden gasped. The sphere pulsed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She could feel its weight, not physical, but present. She willed it to move, and it drifted left, then right, following her thoughts. Then it destabilized and exploded in a flash of harmless light. Arden laughed breathlessly. It was a start. She practiced every night, pushing the limits of what she could do. She learned to hold the light longer, to shape it into different forms. Blades, shields, bursts of force. She learned to channel it through her body, enhancing her speed and strength beyond what should have been possible. And she learned that the power had a cost. Each time she used it, she felt a pull, something deep inside her being consumed, burned away to fuel the light. It wasn't painful, but it was there, a slow drain that left her hollow if she pushed too far. She learned to balance it, to use just enough, to pull back before the cost became too high. But she also learned that if she needed to, if her life depended on it, she could push further. She could burn brighter. The winter gathering was held in neutral territory, a massive stone lodge built centuries ago on the border between packlands. Arden had never seen it before. Exiles weren't permitted at such events, but she'd heard stories. It was a place of truce where disputes were settled and alliances forged, or broken. Kael's plan was simple in theory, dangerous in execution. They would enter the gathering as representatives of the northern clans, present the evidence against Greymarch publicly, and demand the council answer for their crimes. If the other packs sided with them, Greymarch would be forced to submit to an external investigation. If not, well, that's where the swords came in. The night before they left, Arden sat outside her tent, sharpening her blade. The camp was quiet, most of the fighters already asleep. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Kael approaching. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much to think about." He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a while, neither of them spoke. "Are you afraid?" Kael asked finally. Arden considered the question. "Yes, but not of dying." "Then what?" "Of failing, of letting Matthias's death mean nothing." She set down the whetstone and looked at him. "What about you?" "I stopped being afraid a long time ago," Kael said quietly. "After my family died, fear didn't seem to matter anymore. There was just the mission, justice, revenge, whatever you want to call it." "And now?" He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Now I'm afraid of losing something again. Someone." Arden's breath caught. She didn't know what to say, so she did the only thing that felt right. She reached out and took his hand. Kael's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "We're going to make them pay," she said softly. "I know," Kael replied, "because you're not the woman they exiled anymore. You're something they can't predict, can't control." Arden looked down at their joined hands and saw faint blue light tracing along her knuckles. Kael saw it too, but he didn't pull away. "What do you think it is?" she asked. "This power?" "I think," Kael said slowly, "that it's something old, something that was waiting for someone desperate enough to claim it." He paused. "And I think the people who hurt you have no idea what's coming." Arden smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. "Good. That." They rode out at first light, 12 fighters on horseback moving fast through the winter forest. Arden rode beside Kael, her sword strapped to her back, Matthias's journal secured in a waterproof pouch at her belt. The journey took 3 days. They avoided major roads, sticking to game trails and frozen stream beds. Twice they spotted Greymarch patrols and detoured around them. The tension ratcheted higher with each passing mile. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and saw the lodge in the valley below. It was massive, 3 stories of timber and stone, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. Banners from different packs hung from the walls, marking delegations already arrived. Arden counted at least 15 different colors. "There's Greymarch," Ryla said, pointing to a cluster of dark blue and silver banners near the main entrance. Arden's stomach tightened. Somewhere down there were the people who'd condemned her. The people who'd killed Matthias. "Remember the plan," Kael said. "We present the evidence during the open council session tomorrow. Until then, we keep our heads down and avoid confrontation." "And if they recognize her?" Vera asked, nodding at Arden. "Then we improvise," Kael said grimly. They descended into the valley and approached the lodge. Guards stood at the entrance, checking credentials. Kael presented papers identifying them as Northern Clan representatives, and after a tense moment, the guards waved them through. Inside, the lodge was a controlled chaos of voices, bodies, and competing interests. Delegates from a dozen packs mingled in the great hall, drinking mulled wine and conducting quiet negotiations. Arden kept her hood up, her face hidden. They were shown to quarters on the 2nd floor, a large room with bedrolls laid out in rows. It wasn't private, but it was better than sleeping in the snow. "Stay close," Kael told Arden. "Don't go anywhere alone." She nodded, but as the evening wore on and the hall filled with people, she felt the walls closing in. She needed air, needed space. She slipped out a side door and found herself in a quiet corridor. She walked until she reached a balcony overlooking the valley, the cold night air sharp against her face. She stood there for a long time, trying to calm her racing heart. Then a voice behind her said, "I know you." Arden spun. A woman stood in the corridor, older, with gray streaking her dark hair. She wore the colors of Grey March, dark blue and silver. Recognition slammed into Arden like a fist. Elder Maris. She'd been one of the council members who'd voted for exile. Maris's eyes widened. "Arden Vale, you're supposed to be dead." Arden's hand went to the knife at her belt. Disappointed? Maris took a step back, her face pale. What are you doing here?" "Finishing what my husband started," Arden said coldly. "You need to leave," Maris hissed. "If the council finds out you're here, they'll what? Kill me again?" Arden laughed bitterly. "I'm not afraid of them anymore." "You should be." Maris glanced around nervously. "You don't understand what you're walking into." "Then explain it to me." Maris hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The council knows someone's been asking questions. They know about the northern clans digging into the raids. They've been preparing. Preparing how? They have allies here. Other packs they've paid off or threatened. If you try to expose them tomorrow, they'll shut you down before you get 3 words out." Maris's eyes were urgent. "You need to run, Arden. Tonight, before it's too late." Arden studied the older woman's face, trying to read the truth there. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I didn't vote to exile you," Maris said quietly. "I was outvoted. And because your husband was a good man and he didn't deserve what they did to him." Arden felt something crack inside her, a small fissure in the wall of anger she'd built. "Then help me. Testify. Tell them what really happened." Maris shook her head, fear stark in her eyes. "I can't. If I speak out, they'll kill me too." "Then you're as guilty as the rest of them," Arden said flatly. She turned and walked back toward the hall, leaving Maris standing alone on the balcony. Arden found Kale in their quarters, sharpening his sword. She told him about the encounter, and his expression darkened. "They know we're here," he said. "Maris didn't seem to know about the evidence," Arden said. "Just that someone was asking questions. Doesn't matter. If they're prepared, we need to be ready for anything." Kyle stood and addressed the room. "Everyone stays armed tomorrow. Stay together. Watch each other's backs." The fighters nodded grimly. Arden lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. Fear and anticipation warred in her chest. Tomorrow, everything would come to a head. Tomorrow, she would face the people who'd destroyed her life, and she would make them answer. The open council session began at midday. The great hall was packed with delegates, witnesses, and observers. A raised platform at the front held seats for the senior elders from each major pack. Arden saw the Grey March delegation sitting in the second row, 5 council members, including Elder Torvin, flanked by a dozen armed guards. Kael's group stood near the back, ready. The session opened with routine business, border disputes, trade agreements, marriage alliances. Arden barely heard any of it. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Finally, Kael stepped forward. "I request the floor." The lead elder, an ancient woman from the eastern packs, nodded. "State your name and business." "Kael Thorne, representing the northern clans. I bring evidence of corruption within the Grey March Pack Council." A ripple of shock went through the hall. The Grey March delegation surged to their feet, shouting protests. "This is an outrage!" Torvin roared. "We will not be slandered by northern savages." "Then let the evidence speak," Kael said calmly. He produced Matthias's journal and held it up. "This belonged to Matthias Vale, a Grey March citizen executed for treason. It contains proof that members of your council accepted bribes from raider clans in exchange for safe passage through your territory." The hall erupted. Voices overlapped, some demanding to see the journal, others shouting for Kael to be removed. The lead elder banged her staff on the floor. "Silence!" Order slowly returned. "These are serious accusations," the elder said. "Do you have witnesses to corroborate this evidence?" Kael turned and gestured. "I have someone who can testify to its authenticity." Arden stepped forward, lowering her hood. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, shouts. The Grey March delegation went pale. "That's Arden Vale," one of them yelled. "She was exiled. She has no right to be here." "She has every right," Kael said sharply. Her husband gathered this evidence before you killed him. She survived your exile, and she's here to see justice done. Torvin pointed a shaking finger at Arden. She is a liar and a traitor, just like her husband. Then prove it, Arden said, her voice ringing clear through the hall. Let the journal be examined. Let neutral parties verify its contents. If it's lies, you have nothing to fear. Torvin's face twisted with rage. This is a plot, a conspiracy by the North to undermine Greymarch. Or, the lead elder said coldly, it's the truth, and you're afraid of it. She gestured to two guards. Bring me the journal. Kael started to hand it over, and that's when the Greymarch guards drew their weapons. No one touches that journal, Torvin snarled. This session is over. Chaos erupted. Delegates scrambled for cover. Kael's fighters drew their swords. The Greymarch guards advanced, blades raised. Stand down! The lead elder shouted. This is neutral ground. Violence is forbidden. But Torvin was past caring. Kill them, he ordered. The first guard lunged at Kael. Steel rang as their blades met. Around the hall, fighting broke out. Greymarch guards clashing with northern fighters, delegates shouting, benches overturning. Arden saw a guard charging straight at her, sword raised. She didn't think. She just acted. The blue light exploded from her hands in a concussive blast. The guard flew backwards, slamming into the wall and crumpling. Around her, people screamed. For a moment, the entire hall froze, staring at her. Then Torvin's voice cut through the silence. She's a witch! Kill her! More guards converged on Arden. She drew her sword, the blue light flaring along the blade, and met them head-on. She moved faster than she ever had before, the power singing through her veins. She parried, dodged, struck, and every blow landed with unnatural force. Across the hall, Kael was fighting three guards at once, his sword a blur. Ryla and the others formed a defensive line, protecting the journal. Arden saw Torvin trying to escape through a side door. Without thinking, she broke away from the fight and sprinted after him. She caught him in the corridor, slamming him against the wall with a hand wreathed in blue fire. This is for Matthias, she hissed. Torvin's eyes were wide with terror. You're a monster. No, Arden said. I'm what you made me. She heard footsteps behind her. Kael, blood on his sword, breathing hard. It's over, Torvin, Kael said. The journal's in the hands of the council. They'll read it, and when they do, everyone will know what you are. Torvin sagged against the wall, defeated. Back in the Great Hall, the fighting had stopped. Greymarch guards lay disarmed or unconscious. The lead elder stood on the platform, Matthias's journal open in her hands, her face grim. This evidence is damning, she said loudly. Greymarch Pack Council is hereby suspended pending a full investigation. Its members will be detained and questioned. Torvin let out a strangled sound of rage and despair. Arden stepped back, the blue light fading from her hands. She felt hollow, exhausted, but also strangely light. It was done. She'd faced them, exposed them, won. Kael put a hand on her shoulder. You did it. Arden looked at him, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something other than anger. She felt hope. But hope, Arden learned in the days that followed, was a fragile thing. The Greymarch Council members were taken into custody, their protests echoing through the lodge as guards led them to secure quarters. The journal was copied and distributed to the senior elders for review. Witnesses came forward, traders who'd seen the raiders move freely through Greymarch territory, scouts who'd noticed the pattern of selective enforcement. The evidence mounted, damning and irrefutable. Yet Arden couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She stood on the balcony that night, watching snow fall over the valley, when Kael found her. You should be celebrating, he said, joining her at the rail. It feels too easy, Arden replied. Torvin gave up too quickly. He's been playing this game for years. He should have had contingencies, escape routes, something. Kael frowned. You think he's planning something? I think men like him don't go down without a fight. She turned to face him. And I think we just made ourselves very visible targets. As if summoning the danger with her words, a runner burst onto the balcony, gasping for breath. Kael! There's been an attack! The northern camps! Kael grabbed the boy's shoulders. Slow down! What happened? Raiders hit 3 settlements last night, burned them, killed anyone who fought back. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. They left a message, said it was payment for what happened here. Arden's blood went cold. How many dead? 20 confirmed, maybe more. The boy swallowed hard. They're saying it's because of you, because you challenged Grey March. Cale's face went white, then red with fury. Get Ryla and the others. We ride in an hour. The boy ran off. Cale turned to Arden and she saw the barely controlled rage in his eyes. This is my fault, he said quietly. I brought you here. I pushed for the confrontation. No. Arden grabbed his arm. This is on them. Torvin and whoever he's working with. They're trying to make us look like the villains. It's working. Cale pulled away and began pacing. The other packs are already whispering, saying we destabilized the region, that we should have gone through proper channels instead of making a spectacle. Proper channels? Arden's voice rose. The proper channels killed my husband and tried to kill me. I know, Cale shouted, then immediately lowered his voice. I know, but now innocent people are dying because we acted. Arden wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because he was right. They'd struck at Grey March's corruption, and Grey March had struck back, not at them, but at the vulnerable, at people who couldn't defend themselves. It was a calculated move, vicious and effective. So what do we do? She asked quietly. Cale's jaw clenched. We end this, permanently. They rode north in a blizzard, 12 fighters pushing their horses through knee-deep snow. The journey that had taken 3 days going south took 5 going north, and by the time they reached the first burned settlement, Arden's face was raw from wind and cold. The devastation was total. Homes reduced to charred frameworks, bodies frozen in the snow, some still clutching weapons they'd tried to use in defense. The survivors, mostly children and elders, huddled in a makeshift shelter, eyes hollow with shock. Ryla dismounted and immediately began organizing relief efforts, but Arden could see the fury in every movement. This had been Ryla's home settlement. These were her people. Cale approached an old woman sitting by a fire, her face streaked with soot. Can you tell us what happened? He asked gently. The woman's eyes focused slowly. They came at night, maybe 30 of them, wearing unmarked armor. They didn't ask for anything, didn't make demands, just started killing. Her voice was flat, emotionless. When it was over, one of them left a message carved into the council house wall. What did it say? This is the price of rebellion. Arden felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just retaliation, it was a warning, a demonstration of power. Cale stood, his face a mask of controlled fury. We need to find out who sent them. If it was Grey March, it wasn't Grey March, a voice said from behind them. They turned to see Elder Maris standing at the edge of the camp, wrapped in heavy furs, flanked by 2 guards. She looked older than she had at the lodge, worn and frightened. What are you doing here? Arden demanded. I came to warn you. Maris stepped closer, her guard staying back. The council members you exposed, they're not the real power. They're middlemen. Torvin, the others, they were taking orders from someone else. Cale's eyes narrowed. Who? I don't know his real name. We only ever called him the broker. He operates out of the borderlands, coordinates between raider clans and corrupt officials across multiple territories. Maris's hands trembled. The bribes Matthias documented. That was just one small piece. The broker has people everywhere, Grey March, the Eastern Pacts, probably even in the neutral territories. And you're just telling us this now? Arden's voice was sharp with anger. I was afraid. I still am. Maris looked around nervously. But after the attacks, I realized staying silent makes me complicit. Your husband died trying to expose this. The least I can do is help finish what he started. Cale studied her for a long moment. How do we find this broker? You don't. He finds you. Maris pulled a folded piece of paper from her cloak. But I know where his base of operations is. A fortress in the Black Ridge Mountains, 3 days east of here. It's heavily guarded, impossible to assault directly. Then how do we get to him? Arden asked. Maris hesitated. There's a supply caravan that runs to the fortress every 2 weeks. The next one leaves from a trading post called Wolfden in 4 days. If you could intercept it, replace the guards. We could get inside, Cale finished. His expression was grim. It's a long shot. It's the only shot, Maris said. But you need to know, if you go after the broker, you're declaring war on an organization that spans half the continent. Even if you kill him, his people will come after you. They'll never stop. Arden looked at Kael and saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. Good, she said coldly. Neither will we. Quote, they left the burned settlement at dawn, taking only 6 fighters, Kael, Arden, Ryla, Vyra, Braun, and Tarek. The rest stayed behind to help the survivors rebuild and defend against further attacks. The journey to Wolfden was brutal. The blizzard intensified, reducing visibility to a few feet. They lost 1 horse to a broken leg and had to redistribute supplies. Arden used her power to keep them warm at night, channeling heat through her hands into the fire, but it left her drained and hollow. On the 3rd night, camped in a cave while the storm raged outside, Ryla approached her. Can I ask you something? The red-haired woman said, sitting down across from the fire. Arden nodded warily. That power you used at the lodge, what is it? I don't know exactly. I found something in the ruins where they exiled me. It changed me. Ryla was quiet for a moment. My brother died in a raid 2 years ago. The same raiders that Greymarch was protecting. When Kael told me about your husband's evidence, I thought finally someone would pay. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then you showed up, and I hated you, because you were Greymarch, and Greymarch killed my family. I understand, Arden said quietly. I don't think you do. Ryla's voice hardened. I hated you, but I was also jealous. Because you have this incredible power, this ability to fight back in ways the rest of us can't, and you're using it for revenge, just like I wish I could. Arden shook her head. It's not about revenge anymore. Then what is it about? Survival, justice, making sure no one else has to go through what we did. Arden met Ryla's eyes. Your brother, my husband, they're gone. We can't bring them back, but we can make sure their deaths meant something. Ryla stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, then let's make it count. Wolfden was less a town and more a fortified trading post. High walls, armed guards, and a perpetual stream of caravans moving goods between territories. Kael's group arrived posing as independent traders, their weapons hidden under layers of furs and supplies. They found the caravan Maris had mentioned, 6 heavy wagons loaded with crates, guarded by a dozen armed men wearing the broker's colors, black and red. We can't fight them here, Kael said, watching from a tavern window. Too many civilians, too much attention. Then we follow them, Arden suggested. Wait until they're on the road, hit them in the mountains where no one will see. Vera frowned. That gives them the advantage of terrain and defensive position. Not if we use Arden's power, Ryla said, glancing at her. You can do more than just make light, can't you? You threw that guard across the hall like he was nothing. Arden hesitated. She'd been experimenting with the power in private, pushing its limits, but she wasn't sure she could control it in combat. The more she used, the more it consumed, and she still didn't fully understand what it was consuming, but they didn't have many options. I can try, she said. The caravan left at dawn the next day. Kael's group followed at a distance, staying off the main road, using the forest for cover. The route wound up into the mountains, the path becoming narrow and treacherous. On the 2nd day, they found their opportunity. A section of the road cut through a narrow gorge, steep rock walls on both sides, barely wide enough for the wagons. It was the perfect ambush point. They positioned themselves on the cliffs above, waiting as the caravan approached. Arden could feel her heart pounding, the blue light already stirring beneath her skin in anticipation. Remember, Kael said quietly, we need at least one of them alive to question. Everyone else is fair game, Ryla finished grimly. The first wagon entered the gorge, then the second, third. Kael gave the signal. Arden stood and thrust her hands forward. Blue light erupted from her palms in a concentrated beam, slamming into the lead wagon. The vehicle exploded in a shower of splinters, the horses screaming and bolting. Guards shouted in alarm, drawing weapons. Kael and the others rappelled down from the cliffs, hitting the caravan from above. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed, Blood painted the snow. Arden leaped down, the blue light forming a blade in her hand. A guard charged at her, and she cut through his sword like it was paper, then drove the light blade through his chest. He fell, smoke rising from the wound. Another guard came at her from behind. She spun, throwing a sphere of condensed energy that caught him in the face. He dropped without a sound. Around her, the battle was chaos. Kale fought with brutal efficiency, his sword finding gaps in armor with surgical precision. Ryla wielded twin axes, her movements wild but effective. The others moved like a coordinated unit, covering each other, pressing the attack. Within minutes, it was over. 11 guards lay dead or dying. The 12th was on his knees, disarmed, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Tarek held a knife to his throat. Kale approached, his sword still dripping. "You're going to tell us everything you know about the broker." The guard spat blood. "Go to hell." "Wrong answer." Kale nodded to Tarek, who pressed the knife harder. "Wait!" The guard's eyes widened. "Wait, I'll talk. Just don't kill me." "Start talking." The guard swallowed hard. "The fortress. It's in the Black Ridge, like you probably know. Maybe 100 men garrison it. The broker's there now, meeting with representatives from the eastern clans. Big negotiations, lots of money changing hands." "How do we get inside?" Arden asked. "You don't. The only way in is through the main gate, and it's always guarded. Even with these wagons, they'll check the cargo, verify the drivers." He looked at them desperately. "You can't just walk in." Kale glanced at Arden. "What if we had inside help?" The guard laughed bitterly. "From who? Everyone in that fortress is loyal to the broker. He pays too well." "Everyone has a price," Ryla said coldly. "What's yours?" The guard hesitated, then said, "Let me live, and I'll get you inside. I'm scheduled to return with the empty wagons in 3 days. I can bring you in as new recruits. The broker's always looking for fighters." Kyle considered this. "And once we're inside?" "You're on your own, but I can get you through the gate." The guard's eyes flicked between them. "That's the best I can offer." "It's enough," Arden said. Kyle studied the man for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you betray us, you'll pray for a quick death." The guard nodded rapidly. "I won't. I swear." They bound his hands and set about salvaging what they could from the caravan. The wagons were loaded with supplies, weapons, food, coin. More than enough to suggest the broker's operation was large and well-funded. In one of the crates, Arden found something that made her blood run cold. Shackles, dozens of them, sized for children. "What the hell is this?" she called out. Kael came over and looked at the crate, his expression darkening. "Slavers. The broker's not just coordinating raids, he's trafficking people." Ryla's face went white. "My brother, when they took him, they said the raiders killed him, but..." "We don't know that he was sold," Kael said quickly. Don't patronize me," Ryla's voice cracked. "You think I haven't wondered? That I haven't had nightmares about it?" Arden closed the crate, feeling sick. This was bigger than corruption, bigger than bribes and political maneuvering. The broker was running a network of violence and exploitation that stretched across territories, destroying families, destroying lives. And they were about to walk straight into his stronghold with 6 people and a plan that depended on a captured guard's cooperation. "We're going to need more than just getting inside," she said quietly. "We're going to need a way to bring the whole thing down." Kael met her eyes. "I'm open to suggestions." Arden looked at her hands, at the faint blue glow beneath her skin. She thought about the chamber beneath the hollows, about the power that had changed her, shaped her, given her strength when she had nothing. And she thought about what Maris had said. "If you do this, they'll never stop coming after you. Good, let them come." "I have an idea," she said, "but you're not going to like it, Mom." The Black Ridge fortress rose from the mountainside like a scar, all dark stone and iron, surrounded by sheer cliffs on 3 sides. The only approach was a winding road that switchbacked up the mountain, exposed and vulnerable. They arrived at dusk on the 3rd day, driving the 2 remaining wagons, dressed in the guard's armor. The captured guard, his name was Finn, sat in the driver's seat of the lead wagon, his hands unbound but a knife at his ribs courtesy of Braun. At the gate, 2 sentries stepped out, crossbows raised. "State your business," one called. "Supply run from Wolfton," Finn replied, his voice steady, plus 5 new recruits. Broker said he needed more muscle for the Eastern operation. The sentry approached, studying them with suspicious eyes. Arden kept her face neutral, her hood up, praying the fading light would hide her features. "Papers," the sentry demanded. Finn handed over a set of documents. The sentry examined them, his frown deepening. Arden's hand inched toward her blade. Then the sentry grunted and handed the papers back. "All right, take the wagons to the supply depot. Recruits report to the barracks for processing." The gate creaked open. They were in. The interior of the fortress was a maze of corridors and courtyards, lit by torches and braziers. Guards were everywhere, armed and alert. Arden counted at least 30 in the first courtyard alone. They left the wagons at the depot and were escorted to the barracks, a long stone building with rows of bunks and weapon racks. A scarred man with captain's insignia looked them over with disdain. "Fresh meat," he said. "You'll be assigned to patrol rotations starting tomorrow. Mess hall is through the east door, latrines out back. Cause trouble, you get thrown off the cliff. Understand?" They nodded. "Good. Find a bunk and stay out of the way." The captain left. Around them, other fighters went about their business, ignoring the newcomers. Arden and the others found empty bunks in a corner and began the delicate process of gathering information without drawing attention. Over the next 2 days, they mapped the fortress. Arden used her enhanced senses to listen through walls, to feel the vibrations of footsteps and identify patrol patterns. They learned that the broker's personal quarters were in the central tower, guarded by his elite bodyguards. They learned that the main armory was in the basement, along with holding cells, where the slaves were kept before transport, and they learned that the broker was planning something big. Arden overheard 2 guards talking in the mess hall. "Big meeting tomorrow night, all the Eastern representatives, brokers finalizing the deal." "What deal?" "Don't know specifics, but I heard it involves taking over 3 more territories, expanding the network." Arden reported this to Kyle that night, speaking in whispers in the dark barracks. "If he's meeting with all his allies at once, that's our chance," Kyle said. "We hit them while they're gathered, cut the head off the snake." "And start a war with everyone in that room," Vera pointed out. "We're already at war," Ryla said. "We just haven't been fighting it openly." Arden closed her eyes, thinking. The plan she'd proposed back in the mountains was starting to crystallize. It was dangerous, more than dangerous. It was potentially suicidal, but it was the only way she could see to truly end this. "There's something else," she said quietly. "The slaves in the holding cells. We can't leave them here." "We can't save everyone, Arden," Kale said gently. "I'm not leaving children in chains." Her voice was steel. "We get them out, or I don't move." Kyle sighed. "All right, we split up. Half of us go for the broker, half for the holding cells. We coordinate the timing so both happen simultaneously. Maximum chaos, harder for them to respond." "I'll take the broker," Arden said. "Arden, this is what I came here for, to face the person responsible, to make him answer." She looked at Kyle, her eyes pleading. "Let me finish this." Kyle searched her face for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Take Ryla with you. The rest of us will handle the cells and set charges in the armory. When they blow, the whole fortress will know something's wrong." "How long do we have?" Ryla asked. "From the moment we start moving to the moment the alarm sounds, maybe 5 minutes. After that, it's a race to get out before they lock the whole place down." Arden took a deep breath. 5 minutes to infiltrate the tower, confront the broker, and escape. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. The next night, they moved. Kyle, Vira, Braun, and Tarek slipped out of the barracks during the shift change and made their way toward the basement levels. Arden and Ryla went the opposite direction, toward the central tower. The tower entrance was guarded by 2 men in heavy armor. Arden and Ryla approached casually, as if heading to a different section of the fortress. Then, in perfect synchronization, they struck. Arden's light blade materialized, cutting through the first guard's throat before he could shout. Ryla's axe took the second in the chest. Both bodies hit the ground with muffled thuds. They dragged them into the shadows and slipped through the door. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward. They climbed quickly, Arden's senses stretched to their limit, listening for guards. They encountered 2 more on the second landing. Both died quickly and quietly. At the top of the stairs, a heavy door blocked their way. Arden could hear voices beyond it, muffled but distinct. "This is it," she whispered. Ryla nodded, readying her axes. Arden placed her hand on the door and channeled power into it. The lock melted, the metal warping and breaking. She kicked the door open and rushed inside. The room was large, dominated by a circular table where 6 men sat, documents and maps spread before them. All of them looked up in shock as Arden and Ryla burst in. At the head of the table sat a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with cold, intelligent eyes. The broker. "Who?" he began. Arden's light blade flashed, cutting down the nearest man. Ryla charged the others. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for weapons, shouting. The broker remained seated, watching with unnerving calm. Arden fought through the bodyguards, her power blazing. One man came at her with a sword. She caught the blade in her bare hand, the light protecting her skin, and crushed it to slag before driving her fist into his face. Another tried to tackle her. She threw him across the room with a pulse of force. Within seconds, everyone except the broker was dead or dying. Arden advanced on him, her blade humming with energy. "Arden Vale," the broker said, as if they were old acquaintances. "I've heard about you." "Good. Then you know why I'm here." "Because your husband died exposing my operation. Because you want revenge." He smiled slightly. "Understandable, but ultimately pointless. You're about to die. Nothing about this is pointless. Kill me, and someone else takes my place tomorrow. This network is bigger than one man." He gestured around the room. "You think this ends with me? I have partners in a dozen territories. Investors, clients. Even if you burn this fortress to the ground, the organization survives." Arden's jaw clenched. "Then I'll burn them all." "You can't." The broker leaned forward. "But I can offer you something better. Work with me. You have power, real power, the kind that could be very useful. Join the organization, help us expand, get rich, get influential. Make the people who exiled you regret it for the rest of their lives." For a moment, Arden was too stunned to respond. Then she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think I want wealth? Status?" She stepped closer, her blade at his throat. "I want justice, and you're going to help me get it." The broker's eyes narrowed. "How?" "You're going to give me the names. Everyone involved. Every corrupt official, every partner, every investor. You're going to tell me where the money goes, how the network operates, everything. And if I refuse? Then you die here, alone, and I find out anyway. It'll just take longer." Arden pressed the blade against his skin, leaving a thin line of burned flesh. "Choose quickly." The broker studied her, weighing his options. Then he smiled. "Very well, but you should know." The floor beneath them exploded. Arden was thrown backward, slamming into the wall. Her ears rang. Through the smoke and debris, she saw figures climbing through the hole in the floor, guards, heavily armed, moving with military precision. And standing among them, very much alive, was Elder Torvin. "Did you really think it would be this easy?" Torvin said, drawing his sword. "The broker is too valuable to lose. We've been watching you since you entered the fortress." Arden struggled to her feet, disoriented. Where was Ryla? She spotted the red-haired woman across the room, pinned under a fallen beam, unconscious or worse. "The others are already captured," Torvin continued. "Your northern friends, the slaves you tried to free, all of them. It's over, Arden. You lost." Arden felt despair clawing at her chest. This had been a trap. They'd walked right into it. But then she felt something else. The power inside her, responding to her fear and rage, surging up like a tsunami. It burned through her veins, brighter and hotter than ever before. And she realized she'd been holding back, afraid of what the power might cost, afraid of losing control. But if this was the end, if they'd already lost, then what did she have left to lose? Arden looked at Torvin, at the guards, at the broker still seated calmly at his table. And she made a choice. She stopped holding back. The blue light exploded from her body in a blinding wave, filling the room with searing radiance. Guards screamed, throwing their arms up to shield their eyes. The walls cracked. The floor buckled. Arden felt the power consuming her, burning through her reserves, her strength. her very life force, and she didn't care. She extended her hands and unleashed everything she had. The tower began to collapse. The world became light and sound and fury. Stone cracked like thunder. Support beams splintered. The tower's entire upper section shuddered, and Arden felt it through the soles of her feet. The moment when structure gave way to gravity. She was standing at the center of a controlled collapse, her power radiating outward in waves that tore through everything except what she protected. Around her, guards scrambled for the stairs, abandoning their weapons. Torvin dove behind an overturned table, his face twisted with terror. The broker remained frozen in his chair, eyes wide, finally understanding that he'd miscalculated. Arden pulled the power back, focusing it, shaping it into a shield around herself and Ryla's unconscious form. Debris rained down, bouncing off the barrier of blue light. She crossed to where Ryla lay trapped, grabbed the beam pinning her, and with strength that shouldn't have been possible, hurled it aside. Ryla's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "What?" "We're leaving," Arden said. She hauled the other woman to her feet, supporting her weight. "Can you walk?" "I think, yes." The ceiling above them groaned ominously. Through the smoke and dust, Arden saw Torvin crawling toward the stairs, and fury ignited in her chest. She raised her hand, ready to send a bolt of energy through his spine. Then she stopped. Killing him here, like this, it would be easy, satisfying. But it wouldn't be justice. It wouldn't expose the network, wouldn't free the people suffering under it, wouldn't clear Matthias's name in front of witnesses who mattered. It would just be revenge, and she told herself this was bigger than that. "Go," she told Ryla, pushing her toward the stairs. "Get to the others. I'm right behind you." Ryla stumbled toward the exit. Arden turned to the broker, who was still sitting at his table as if paralyzed. "You wanted to make a deal?" Arden said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Here's my offer. You testify. Every name, every transaction, every piece of evidence. You help us dismantle this entire operation, and maybe you live long enough to see a trial." The broker stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. "Good choice." Arden grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet. Behind her, she heard Torvin shouting something, but the words were lost in the rumble of collapsing stone. She didn't look back. The stairwell was chaos, guards fleeing downward, smoke filling the narrow space, the walls shaking with each successive collapse. Arden kept one hand on the broker, the other blazing with light to clear their path. When they reached the bottom, they emerged into a courtyard in full alarm. Bells were ringing, guards were pouring from the barracks. And in the center of the yard, surrounded by 20 armed men, stood Kael and the others, weapons drawn, backs to each other in a defensive circle. Arden's heart sank. They'd been caught. Then she saw the group of people huddled behind Kael's fighters, ragged, malnourished, chains still dangling from their wrists. The slaves they'd freed. Kael had done it. He'd gotten them out of the cells. But now they were trapped. A voice boomed across the courtyard. "Stand down! Drop your weapons, or we cut down the children first!" Arden saw the captain from the barracks step forward. A young girl held in front of him as a shield, a knife to her throat. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old, her eyes huge with terror. Kael's face was stone. "Let her go." "Drop your weapons." Kael's fighters hesitated, looking to him for guidance. Around them, crossbows were raised, aimed, ready. They were outnumbered 5 to 1. If they fought, some of them might survive. But the freed slaves, the children, wouldn't stand a chance. Arden felt the power inside her stirring, ready to be unleashed again. She could strike from here, take out the captain before he could hurt the girl. But even with her speed, there were too many crossbows. Someone would die. Then the broker spoke beside her, his voice carrying across the yard. "Stand down," he ordered. "All of you." The guards turned, confused. The captain frowned. "Sir?" "I said stand down." The broker stepped forward, and Arden felt him tense, preparing to run, to signal for help. She tightened her grip on his collar and let blue fire trace along her fingertips, a clear warning. The broker swallowed and continued. "These people are under my protection. Release the hostages and lower your weapons. Sir, they attacked the tower, they freed the prisoners. I'm aware of what they did." The broker's voice was steady, though Arden could feel him trembling. "And I'm telling you to stand down. That's an order." The guards exchanged uncertain looks. The captain still held the knife to the girl's throat, but his confidence was wavering. "Do it now," the broker said, "or I'll have you all executed for insubordination." The threat hung in the air. Then, slowly, the captain released the girl and stepped back. Around the courtyard, weapons lowered, not sheathed, but no longer aimed. Kyle caught Arden's eye across the distance, and she saw the question there. She gave him a slight nod. "Trust me. Here's what's going to happen," Arden announced, her voice ringing clear. "The broker has agreed to surrender himself and provide evidence against his entire network. All prisoners are to be released immediately. Anyone who interferes will answer to me personally." To emphasize the point, she raised her free hand and let power gather there, a swirling sphere of blue fire that cast harsh shadows across the courtyard. "Some of you know what I did to the tower," she continued. "I can do worse, much worse, so I suggest you cooperate." The guards stared at her, at the impossible light in her hand, and she saw fear replace defiance in their eyes. "Open the gates," she commanded. "Now!" For a long moment, no one moved. Then the captain jerked his head toward the gatehouse, and 2 guards ran to comply. The massive iron gates began to swing open with a groan of protesting metal. "Kael!" Arden called. "Get them out!" Kael didn't need to be told twice. He and the others began herding the freed slaves toward the gate, weapons still drawn, watching for treachery. The group moved as quickly as the injured could manage, maybe 40 people in total, more than Arden had expected. As they passed, a woman carrying a small child stopped beside Arden and whispered, "Thank you." Arden couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded. When the last of the freed prisoners had cleared the gate, Kael turned back. "Arden! Go!" she shouted. "I'm right behind you." Kael hesitated, torn between following orders and abandoning her. Then Rila grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit, and he went. Arden waited until they were clear, then began backing toward the gate herself. The broker held in front of her like a shield, power still blazing in her hand. "If anyone follows us," she said to the assembled guards, "I'll collapse this entire fortress on your heads. Test me if you doubt it." She didn't think they would. The tower was still burning behind them, smoke pouring from the upper levels, a clear demonstration of what she was capable of. She made it through the gate and started down the winding mountain road. Behind her, she heard shouting, arguments, chaos, but no one pursued. Not yet. They ran through the night. The freed slaves struggled to keep pace, weak from captivity, but fear and hope drove them forward. Arden stayed at the rear of the group, the broker's arm twisted behind his back, ready to use him as a bargaining chip if pursuit caught up. But the expected attack never came. By dawn, they'd put 10 miles between themselves and the fortress, and the slaves were collapsing from exhaustion. Kael called a halt in a sheltered ravine, posting sentries while the others rested. Arden shoved the broker down beside a tree and bound his hands with rope. He didn't resist, just watched her with those calculating eyes. "You realize," he said quietly, "that what you did back there, showing them you'd let me live, that you value prisoners over revenge. You've shown weakness. It'll embolden them." "I don't care what they think," Arden replied. "You should. Weakness in our world gets you killed." "Your world," Arden met his gaze. "Not mine. Not anymore." Kael approached, his expression grim. "We need to talk." They moved away from the group. Kael kept his voice low. "I counted 43 freed prisoners. Most are in bad shape, malnourished, injured, some sick. We can't move fast with them, and we don't have supplies for a long journey. So what do you suggest?" "There's a settlement about 20 miles south. Neutral territory, sympathetic to refugees. We could get them there, make sure they're safe, then continue with just our fighters and the broker." Arden nodded. "How long will that take?" 2 days if we push, 3 to be safe." Kael paused. "But there's something else. While we were in the cells, I found records, ledgers documenting the trafficking operation. Names, dates, payments." His jaw tightened. "Arden, it's not just raiders and corrupt officials. There are people from legitimate packs involved. Merchants, council members, even a few from the neutral territories. How widespread?" "Very. This network, it's bigger than we thought. Taking down the broker is just the beginning." Arden closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders. They'd won a battle, freed some prisoners, captured the person at the center. But the war was far from over. Then we use what we have, she said. The broker's testimony, the ledgers, everything. We expose all of it, make it impossible for anyone to look away. That's going to make us a lot of enemies. We already have enemies. Arden opened her eyes. At least this way we're fighting for something that matters. Kyle studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You've changed. From the woman I met in the hollows. I had to. The old Arden, she would have died in that exile. Arden looked down at her hands, at the faint tracery of blue still visible beneath her skin. This version, she's what survival looks like. It suits you, Kyle said quietly. Before Arden could respond, Ryla approached, her face troubled. We've got a problem, she said. One of the children, a boy, maybe 12, he says he recognizes the broker. Says the broker personally oversaw a raid on his village 6 months ago. The kid wants blood. Arden's stomach sank. Where is he? By the fire. Tarek's keeping him from doing something stupid, but barely. They hurried back to the main camp. A thin boy with haunted eyes stood near the broker, fists clenched, tears streaming down his face. Tarek had a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. He killed my family, the boy was saying, his voice breaking. My mother, my sister. He watched them die and laughed. The broker didn't deny it, just stared at the ground, silent. Arden knelt beside the boy, forcing him to look at her. What's your name? Joran. Joran, I need you to listen to me very carefully. This man, he's done terrible things, unforgivable things, and he deserves to pay for them. Then let me kill him, Joran sobbed. Please. No, because if you kill him now, right here, then all the other people he worked with, all the ones who helped him, who paid him, who profited from what he did, they walk free. They get away with it. And more children lose their families. Joran's face crumpled. It's not fair. You're right, it's not. Arden took his hands. But we're going to make it fair. We're going to make sure everyone knows what he did. We're going to drag every single person involved into the light and make them answer for it. That's justice, Joran. Real justice. Not just revenge. Will it bring them back? The boy whispered. My family? Arden's heart broke. No, nothing will. But it'll mean their deaths weren't meaningless. It'll mean other families might be spared. Joran was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly and stepped back. Arden stood and addressed the entire group. I know many of you have suffered because of this man and people like him. I know you want him to pay, and he will. But not here, not like this. We do this the right way, with witnesses, with evidence, with justice that can't be ignored or dismissed. A woman holding a baby spoke up. What if the authorities don't listen? What if they're part of it too? Then we make enough noise that they can't ignore us, Arden said. We take this to every pack council, every neutral arbiter, every person with the power to act. We don't stop until someone listens. And if no one does? Another voice asked. Arden felt the power stir inside her, responding to her resolve. Then we make them listen. They reached the settlement 2 days later, just as Kyle had predicted. It was a small community built around a natural hot spring, populated by people who'd fled violence in other territories. They welcomed the refugees with open arms, offering food, shelter, medical care. Arden watched as families were reunited, as the freed slaves began to comprehend that they were truly safe. A woman who'd been sold by raiders 3 years ago broke down sobbing when they told her she could stay, that no one would force her to leave. This is why we fight, Kyle said, standing beside Arden. Moments like this. It's not enough, Arden replied, saving 40 people out of thousands. It's a start. That night, the settlement's elders invited them to a council meeting. 8 men and women sat around a table in the communal hall, their faces weathered by hardship, but their eyes sharp. The eldest, a woman named Mara, spoke first. We've heard stories about a woman with unnatural power who attacked the broker's fortress, about a northern warlord seeking justice for his family, about evidence of corruption spanning territories. The stories are true, Kyle said. Then you've brought danger to our doorstep, another elder said. The broker's people will come looking for him, for you. We won't stay long, Arden assured them, just until the refugees are stable. That's not enough. Mara leaned forward. If what you say is true, if this corruption goes as deep as you claim, then running and hiding won't save any of us. Eventually, the network will spread here too. They'll corrupt or destroy this place just like all the others. What are you suggesting? Kyle asked. That you finish what you started, expose the entire network, burn it to the ground. Mara's eyes were fierce. We'll help however we can. Provide testimony, shelter witnesses, whatever you need, but you have to see it through. Arden felt something shift inside her, a crystallization of purpose. This wasn't just about Matthias anymore, or even about the broker. This was about creating a world where places like this settlement could exist without fear. We will, she said. I promise. Over the next week, they worked systematically to document everything. The broker, faced with the alternative of being turned over to Joran and the other survivors, cooperated fully. He provided names, locations, payment records. He drew maps of smuggling routes and identified key players in the network. Kyle and the others cross-referenced this with the ledgers they'd recovered, building an airtight case. Arden spent her time training. She'd pushed herself to the absolute limit at the fortress. And while she'd survived, she'd also glimpsed how close she'd come to burning herself out completely. She needed to understand the power better, to control it rather than just unleashing it. She returned to meditation techniques she'd learned in the chamber beneath the hollows, focusing on the connection between her will and the energy. Slowly, she learned to call on it without it consuming her. She learned to maintain the power at a sustainable level, to pulse it in controlled bursts rather than one catastrophic release. One evening, Kyle found her practicing in a clearing outside the settlement, moving through combat forms with a blade of solid blue light extending from her hand. You're getting better, he observed. Arden let the blade dissipate and turned to face him. I have to be. What we're about to do, confronting the network openly, it's going to make the fortress look like a warm-up. I know. Kyle stepped closer. Arden, I need to ask you something. When this is over, if we survive it, what then? What do you want? Arden was quiet for a moment, considering. A month ago, I would have said I wanted to clear Matthias's name and disappear, live quietly somewhere far away. And now? Now I think I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I want to build something better. She met his eyes. What about you? I wanted revenge. Simple, straightforward revenge against the people who killed my family. Kyle's expression softened, but somewhere along the way that changed. I started wanting to protect people instead of just punishing the guilty. Because of the refugees? Because of you. Kale reached out and took her hand. Watching you choose justice over revenge, even when it would have been so easy to just kill them all, it reminded me that there's more to fighting than destroying your enemies. Arden felt her breath catch. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with possibility. Kyle, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know this isn't the time. We're in the middle of a war. But when it's over, I'd like the chance to see what this could be. Arden squeezed his hand. I'd like that too. They stood there as darkness fell around them, two people who'd lost everything finding something new in each other. Not romance built on desperation, but genuine connection forged through shared purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The summons came a week later. A messenger arrived at the settlement bearing official documents sealed with the marks of multiple pack councils. The Winter Gathering's lead council had reviewed the preliminary evidence and was calling for a full tribunal. All parties were to appear in neutral territory in 2 weeks' time. This is it, Ryla said, reading over the documents. They're actually going to hear the case. It could still be a trap, Vyra warned. The broker said he has allies everywhere. What if some of them are on the tribunal? Then we deal with it, Arden said firmly. We've come too far to back down now. They spent the remaining time preparing. Witnesses were selected from the freed slaves, those strong enough to travel and willing to testify. Statements were recorded, evidence was organized into irrefutable documentation, and Arden practiced, every day, pushing her abilities further, learning to shape the power into new forms. She discovered she could create barriers strong enough to stop arrows. She could enhance her senses to detect lies and deception. She could even share the power with others temporarily, lending them strength and speed. She was becoming something beyond human, something the old world had no name for. On the morning they were set to leave, Mara approached Arden privately. "There's something you should know," the old woman said, "about the power you carry." Arden tensed. "What about it?" "I've seen it before. Or rather, I've read about it. There are old stories, legends from before the packs formed, about warriors who bonded with ancient energies buried in sacred places. They called them the Marked Ones. They were protectors, champions who defended the weak when no one else would." "What happened to them?" Mara's expression was grave. "Some used their power wisely and became legends. Others let it consume them, became tyrants. And a few simply burned out, their bodies unable to sustain the energy. So you're warning me to be careful." "I'm telling you that power without purpose destroys its wielder, but power channeled toward justice, toward protection, can change the world." Mara placed a weathered hand on Arden's shoulder. "You've already chosen your path. Now you just have to walk it all the way to the end." The tribunal was held in the same lodge where the winter gathering had taken place, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Armed guards lined every entrance. Delegates from 20 different packs filled the hall, along with neutral arbiters from the Eastern Territories. Arden and her group entered under heavy escort, the broker shackled between two guards. Whispers followed them through the hall. "That's her, the exile who came back. I heard she destroyed an entire fortress. They say she has unnatural powers." Arden kept her head high, refusing to show fear. Beside her, Kael walked with military precision, a calming presence. They were led to a section reserved for the accusers. Across the hall, she saw a group of well-dressed individuals who could only be representatives of the network. Clean, respectable-looking people who'd never personally bloodied their hands but had profited from the bloodshed nonetheless. The tribunal began with formal procedures, oaths, introductions, establishing the charges. Then the lead arbiter, an elderly man with iron-gray hair, called for the presentation of evidence. Kael stood and delivered a methodical, devastating accounting. He presented the ledgers. He walked through the broker's testimony point by point. He called witnesses, freed slaves who described the raids, the captivity, the trafficking routes. The hall was silent except for his voice. Then it was the defense's turn. A lawyer representing the accused network members stood and immediately attacked. These accusations rely entirely on the testimony of a known criminal, the broker, who has every reason to lie to save his own skin. The so-called evidence could easily be fabricated. And as for the witnesses, how do we know they weren't coerced? "We have documentation," Kael countered. "Physical records matching the testimony, which you claim to have found in the broker's fortress. A fortress you attacked and partially destroyed. Who's to say you didn't plant those records yourselves?" The tribunal murmured. Arden saw doubt creeping into some faces. The defense lawyer pressed his advantage. Furthermore, the woman leading this crusade, Arden Vale, is herself a criminal. An exile, cast out by her own pack for being married to a man who discovered your corruption, Arden interrupted, rising to her feet. "A man you murdered to keep him silent. That's an accusation, not a fact." "Then let's make it a fact." Arden walked to the center of the hall. "Elder Torvin, stand up." In the crowd, Torvin stood slowly, his face carefully neutral. "Did you vote to exile me?" Arden asked. "I did, as was my right as a council member." "And did you vote to execute my husband?" "He was found guilty of treason. Treason for discovering that you were taking bribes from raiders." Arden turned to address the entire hall. "Everything we've presented here, every name, every transaction, it leads back to individuals in positions of power who chose profit over protection. They're not raiders or criminals in the traditional sense. They're people you know, people you've trusted, and that's why this has gone on for so long. Because we couldn't imagine our own leaders betraying us." "More accusations without proof," the defense lawyer said. "Then let me provide proof." Arden raised her hand and blue light flickered across her palm. "This power I carry, it comes from an ancient place, a sacred place. And it has a unique property. It can detect lies. This was a bluff, but a calculated one. The power didn't actually reveal deception directly, but it did enhance her ability to read people, to see micro-expressions and tells that most would miss." "Close enough." The hall erupted in disbelief and argument. The lead arbiter banged his staff. "Silence! This tribunal will not descend into spectacle." "Then let it be a demonstration of truth," Arden said. "I'll ask each accused individual 3 questions. If they can answer honestly, they have nothing to fear." "This is absurd," the defense lawyer sputtered. "Magical interrogation has no legal standing." "Neither does corruption and slavery," Arden shot back. "But here we are." The lead arbiter conferred with the other tribunal members. After several tense minutes, he turned back. "We will allow it, under supervision and with the right of the accused to refuse." One by one, Arden called the accused forward. Most refused to participate, but a few, confident in their ability to lie or convinced of their innocence, accepted. Arden asked simple questions, watching their faces, reading the tension in their bodies, the dilation of pupils, the microshifts in expression. When she sensed deception, she let the blue light flare, dramatic and condemning. "Lie," she would say, and each time the crowd's reaction grew stronger. 3 individuals broke under the scrutiny, confessing to their involvement on the spot, rather than face continued exposure. Their admissions corroborated everything the broker had testified, filling in gaps and confirming details. By the end of the day, the defense had crumbled. The lead arbiter called for a recess, but the verdict was already clear in the faces of the tribunal members. When they reconvened the next morning, it was only to formalize what everyone knew. This tribunal finds sufficient evidence of systematic corruption, trafficking, and abuse of authority, the lead arbiter announced. The accused are hereby remanded for criminal prosecution. Their assets are frozen pending investigation. All territories are advised to audit their own councils for similar corruption. He turned to Arden. "As for you, Arden Vale, your exile is officially overturned. The charges against your husband are posthumously dismissed. His name and honor are restored." Arden felt her knees go weak. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Around the hall, people were standing, some applauding, others arguing. But the noise faded into background as Arden felt the weight of months of grief, anger, and determination finally lift. Kael was beside her in an instant, steadying her. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected. But even in victory, Arden knew this was only the beginning. The network was damaged, but not destroyed. There would be resistance, retaliation, attempts to rebuild. The fight wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. But even as the tribunal members filed out and the hall erupted in chaos, some celebrating, others protesting, a few already scheming their next moves, Arden felt the familiar prickle of warning along her spine. "Something's wrong," she murmured to Kael. He'd learned to trust her instincts. His hand went to his sword. "What?" "Too easy. The broker gave up his entire network without a real fight. Torvin and the others just accepted the verdict." She scanned the crowd, her enhanced senses reaching out. "They're planning something." Before Kael could respond, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. Guards shouted. Steel rang. Then a voice cut through the noise, cold, commanding, and utterly unfamiliar. "Clear the hall, now." The crowd parted, revealing a woman in dark traveling clothes flanked by 20 armed soldiers wearing the crest of the Eastern Coalition. She was perhaps 40, with silver streaking her black hair and eyes like chipped ice. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. The lead arbiter stepped forward, clearly rattled. "Commander Silas, we weren't expecting—" Obviously. The woman, Silas, surveyed the hall with barely concealed contempt. "I've just reviewed your tribunal's findings. Impressive work, exposing a criminal network operating across multiple territories." Her gaze landed on Arden. "Though I'm curious about the methods used. Magical interrogation. Really?" "It was approved by the tribunal," Arden said carefully. "Approved doesn't mean legitimate." Silas walked closer, her soldiers maintaining formation. "Tell me, Arden Vale, where exactly did you acquire this power?" The question landed like a blade. Arden felt every eye in the hall turn to her. "I found it," she said. "In the ruins where I was exiled." "Found it. How convenient." Silas circled her slowly, assessing. "And it never occurred to you that an ancient power lying dormant in forbidden ruins might be forbidden for a reason?" Kyle stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, this isn't relevant to the tribunal's findings. The evidence against the corruption network stands regardless of the evidence obtained through the use of unregulated magical abilities is, by definition, suspect. Silas cut him off without even looking at him, which means your entire case is built on questionable foundations. Arden felt the trap closing. What are you saying? I'm saying that while the Eastern Coalition appreciates your enthusiasm for justice, we cannot allow vigilante magic users to operate unchecked. Silas gestured, and her soldiers moved to surround Arden. You'll come with us. Your power will be studied, regulated, and if necessary, removed. No. The word came out harder than Arden intended, and blue light flickered along her arms in response to her emotion. Silas raised an eyebrow. That wasn't a request. You're either an asset to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. Choose carefully. The hall had gone deathly silent. Arden saw calculations in Silas's eyes. She wanted Arden to resist, to give her an excuse to use force. This woman didn't care about justice or corruption. She cared about power, and Arden represented an uncontrolled variable. Kael's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Around the hall, Arden's allies were tensing, ready to fight. But Silas's soldiers were professional military, armored, disciplined, deadly. If violence erupted here, people would die. Stand down, Arden said quietly to Kael. Arden, I said stand down. She looked at Silas. I'll go with you, but on one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions. The tribunal's findings stand. The corruption network is dismantled. The accused are prosecuted. My cooperation in exchange for seeing this through to the end. Silas considered this. And if I refuse? Arden let the power surge, just enough to make every torch in the hall flare bright blue for a heartbeat. Then you'll learn exactly why ancient powers were buried in the first place. It was a bluff. She had no intention of attacking, not with so many civilians present. But Silas didn't know that. The commander's eyes narrowed, reassessing the situation. Very well, she said finally. The tribunal's work continues, but you come with us. Now. Arden, don't do this, Ryla hissed from the crowd. But Arden was already walking toward Silas's soldiers, hands raised peacefully. As they closed around her, she caught Kael's eye and mouthed 2 words, trust me. Then they led her out of the hall. The Eastern Coalition's compound was a fortress built into a mountainside, all stone and iron and military precision. They took Arden deep underground to a chamber lined with strange symbols that seemed designed to contain magical energy. Silas dismissed the soldiers and stood across from Arden, arms crossed. You're either very brave or very stupid, the commander said, surrendering yourself like that. I did what I had to do to protect the people I care about, Arden replied. Same as always. Silas walked to a table where various instruments were laid out, some medical, some more arcane. Let's be honest with each other, shall we? I don't actually care about your tribunal or the corruption network. That's regional politics, beneath my concern. What I care about is that you've bonded with an ancient power source without authorization, training, or oversight. I didn't exactly have a choice. It was bond with it or die in exile. And now you're using it to reshape political structures, expose conspiracies, fight wars. Silas picked up a crystal device that hummed faintly. Do you understand what you are? You're a walking weapon of mass destruction with no allegiance to any recognized authority. That makes you dangerous. So what? You're going to kill me? Extract the power? Lock me up? I'm going to offer you a choice. Silas set down the device and faced her fully. The Eastern Coalition has been studying ancient powers for decades. We have facilities, experts, resources. We could teach you to master what you carry, to use it safely and effectively. In exchange, you work for us, protect our interests, eliminate our threats. Become your weapon, in other words. Become a force for order in a chaotic world. Silas's voice was almost gentle. Look at what you've accomplished. Exposing corruption, freeing slaves, bringing criminals to justice. Imagine what you could do with proper backing, resources, intelligence, support. For just a moment, Arden let herself consider it. No more struggling alone. No more improvising. Real power, real protection for the people who needed it. Then she thought about the cost, losing her autonomy, becoming a tool in someone else's agenda, trading one kind of cage for another, no matter how gilded. No, she said firmly. Silas's expression didn't change. Then I'm afraid we have a problem. The commander gestured, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. Arden felt the power inside her recoil, trapped by whatever magic was woven into this chamber. This room was designed to contain entities far more powerful than you, Silas said. You'll stay here until you change your mind. Days, weeks, months, however long it takes. Or you die. Whichever comes first. Silas walked toward the door. I truly hope you reconsider. You could do so much good under the right guidance. The door sealed shut with a sound like thunder. Arden was alone. The first day was the worst. The containment symbols drained her constantly, siphoning off the power before she could gather enough to do anything useful. Every attempt to break free left her weaker, more exhausted. By nightfall, she collapsed on the stone floor, too tired even to rage. But as she lay there in the darkness, she remembered something Mara had said. Power without purpose destroys its wielder. But power channeled toward justice can change the world. She'd been using the power as a weapon, a tool, an external force. But what if she stopped fighting it and started working with it instead? Arden closed her eyes and reached inward, not trying to gather the power but to understand it. She felt the energy flowing through her, being drawn away by the containment symbols. She followed that flow, tracing it back to its source. And there, deep in her core, she found something she'd never noticed before. A wellspring, ancient and vast, that had been dormant until she'd touched those runes in the hollows. The power wasn't something external that had invaded her. It was something that had always been there, waiting to be awakened. She was the source, which meant the containment symbols couldn't drain what she didn't release. Over the next 3 days, Arden practiced absolute control. She learned to hold the power inside, to let it circulate through her body without releasing it into the environment where the symbols could catch it. She learned to compress it, condense it, make it denser and more potent. She was building a reservoir. And when she was ready, when she had enough, she would break free. On the 4th night, Silas returned. You look terrible, the commander observed. Reconsidered my offer yet? Actually, yes. Arden stood slowly, swaying slightly for effect. I'll work with you, train with you, just, please, I can't stay in here anymore. Silas studied her, clearly suspicious. That was easier than expected. I'm tired of fighting, tired of being alone. You were right, I need guidance. Arden let genuine exhaustion color her voice. It wasn't hard, she was exhausted, just not broken. Just get me out of this room. The commander considered this for a long moment. Then she gestured and the symbols dimmed. Arden felt the pressure ease. She took a careful breath, maintaining her facade of weakness while gathering power internally. Come on, Silas said, turning toward the door. Let's get you something to eat and we can discuss. Arden struck. She'd been compressing power for 3 days. Now she released it all at once, not outward in a destructive blast, but inward, through her body, enhancing every cell to superhuman levels. She moved faster than thought, crossing the distance to Silas in a blink. Her hand closed around the commander's throat, and blue fire flared. I'm going to walk out of here, Arden said quietly. You're going to let me. And then you're going to forget I exist. Understand? Silas couldn't speak, but her eyes blazed with fury. Arden increased the pressure slightly. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to fight the Eastern Coalition. But I will not be controlled. Not by you, not by anyone. So here's what's going to happen. You tell your people I escaped using overwhelming force. You classify me as too dangerous to pursue, and you leave me alone. She released Silas, who staggered back, gasping. You just made an enemy of the most powerful military organization on the continent, Silas rasped. No, I made it clear that I'm not interested in being anyone's weapon. There's a difference. Arden walked toward the door. Stay out of my way, and I'll stay out of yours. And if we don't? Arden looked back and for just a moment let the full weight of the power show in her eyes. Not a threat, just a truth. Then you'll learn why ancient powers were buried in the first place. She left Silas standing in the containment chamber and made her way through the compound. Alarms were already sounding, but she moved too fast to be caught. Guards appeared in her path. She dodged around them or knocked them aside with precise applications of force, careful not to kill. She burst out of the main entrance and into the night, where Kael and the others were waiting with horses. "How did you know I'd come out this way?" Arden asked, swinging into a saddle. "Because you always find a way," Kael said with a grim smile. "Now ride." They galloped into the darkness, leaving the coalition compound and its alarms far behind. Dussie! They rode for 2 days before stopping at a small way station in neutral territory. Exhausted, Arden collapsed in a chair while the others secured supplies and checked for pursuit. Kael sat across from her, studying her face. "What happened in there?" "I learned something important." Arden looked at her hands, watching the faint blue tracery pulse beneath her skin. "This power, it's not something separate from me. It's part of who I am now, which means I can't be controlled or contained unless I let myself be. That's going to make a lot of powerful people nervous. I know, and I don't care." Arden met his eyes. "I spent months being told what I couldn't do, where I couldn't go, who I had to be. I'm done with that. From now on, I make my own choices. Even if it means being hunted? Especially then." Ryla entered, carrying news. The tribunal finished its work. 27 individuals convicted, assets seized, territories under reform. The broker and Torvin are both sentenced to life imprisonment. She paused. "They're calling it the Veil Reformation, after Matthias." Arden felt tears prick her eyes. He'd hate that. He always said credit belonged to the people who did the work, not the ones who got remembered. "Then we'll make sure the work continues," Kael said. "The network's leadership is gone, but you were right. This was bigger than a few corrupt officials. There are still cells operating, still victims being traded. So we keep fighting," Arden said simply. "Where?" Vera asked. "The Coalition wants you dead or captured. Grey March is in chaos. Half the territories think you're a hero, the other half think you're a dangerous radical." Arden thought about this. Then she smiled slowly. "North. We go north to where this all started. To the Hollows. Osmoti." The journey back to the ruins took a week. When they arrived, Arden barely recognized the place. What had been a desolate, abandoned ruin was now bustling with activity. People were clearing debris, building structures, planting gardens. Mara stood at the center of it all, directing the work. "What is all this?" Arden asked, dismounting. "Refugees," Mara explained. "Word spread about what you did. Freeing the slaves, taking down the network. People started arriving, looking for safety, looking for hope." She gestured around. "They're building something new here, a place where the old rules don't apply, where power comes from protection, not exploitation." Arden walked through the growing settlement, seeing families working together, children playing, guards training to defend rather than oppress. It was everything she'd fought for, taking physical form. "We're calling it Vale's Rest," Mara continued, "unless you object." "Matthias's name, not mine," Arden said firmly. "Both, actually. You both earned it." That night, they gathered around a fire. Arden, Kael, Ryla, and a dozen others who'd fought alongside them. They shared food, stories, plans for the future. "The Coalition won't let this stand," Braun pointed out. "They'll see it as a threat to established order." "Let them try," Ryla said fiercely. "We've faced worse." "Actually," Arden said quietly, "I think Silas was right about one thing. We need structure, not the old kind, not hierarchies built on fear and control, but something. Rules we can all agree to, a way to resolve disputes without violence, protection for the vulnerable." "You're talking about building a new pack," Kyle said. "No, not a pack, something different." Arden looked around the circle. "A community, where membership isn't about bloodline or politics, but about commitment to protecting each other, where power is used to defend, not dominate." "And who leads this community?" Vira asked. "We all do. Together." Arden met each person's eyes in turn. "I'm done with single points of failure, with corrupt leaders and unchecked authority. We make decisions collectively, we hold each other accountable." "That's a beautiful idea," Tarek said slowly. "But in practice, it'll be messy and complicated and frustrating," Arden finished. "But it'll be ours, built on principles we choose, not ones inherited from people who never had our interests at heart." They talked long into the night, hammering out the basics of what would become the Veil Covenant, a set of principles focused on mutual protection, transparent governance, and individual freedom balanced with collective responsibility. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Over the following months, Vale's Rest grew. More refugees arrived. The settlement expanded. Arden trained those with potential in combat and defense, teaching them not just techniques but philosophy, when to fight, when to negotiate, when to walk away. She also spent time in the chamber beneath the ruins, studying the ancient runes, slowly unlocking their secrets. She learned that the power she carried was one of 5 such sources scattered across the world, each buried in places of significance, each waiting for someone desperate enough or worthy enough to claim them. She wondered if others had found their sources, if somewhere out there other people were struggling with the same questions about power and purpose and cost. But that was a problem for another day. Kyle became her partner in more than just fighting. They built a life together slowly, carefully, neither rushing nor hesitating. It wasn't the desperate romance of people clinging to each other in darkness. It was the steady, grounded connection of 2 people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen each other anyway. One evening, 6 months after the tribunal, they stood together on the walls of Vale's Rest, watching the sunset paint the snow gold and red. "Do you ever regret it?" Kyle asked, "choosing this over a quiet life somewhere far away?" Arden considered the question. "Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if Matthias hadn't been killed. If I'd never been exiled, if I'd just stayed small and safe and unimportant. And I realized that woman, the one I was before, she was good, kind, loyal. But she was also afraid to make waves, to challenge authority, to claim power." Arden looked down at her hands, where blue light pulsed gently beneath her skin. "This version of me, the one forged in the hollows, she's not afraid anymore. Was it worth it? The exile, the suffering, the battles?" Arden thought about Matthias, about the grief that still caught her sometimes in quiet moments, about the scars she carried, visible and invisible, about the responsibilities she'd shouldered and the enemies she'd made. Then she looked out at Vale's Rest, at the lights and windows, at people living freely, at the future they were building together. "Yes," she said simply. "It was worth it." Below them, the settlement continued its evening rhythms. Guards changed shifts, families gathered for dinner. Children practiced combat forms in the training yard, their laughter carrying on the cold air. A messenger approached, bringing news of another group of refugees seeking sanctuary. Arden nodded, already mentally organizing housing and supplies. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd lost, but the one she'd built from nothing in the harshest place imaginable. She was no longer Arden Vale, the exiled widow. No longer the woman they'd tried to erase. She was Arden Vale, founder of Vale's Rest. Teacher, protector, leader. And she was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring came, and with it, change. The Vale Covenant had grown beyond a single settlement. 3 more communities had formed in the Northern Territories, all following similar principles. They'd established trade routes, mutual defense pacts, and a rotating council that met quarterly to address shared concerns. The Eastern Coalition had made 2 attempts to shut them down. Both had failed, not through violence, but through the simple fact that every time they arrested someone or destroyed a settlement, 3 more people joined the cause, and 2 more communities sprang up. You couldn't kill an idea with force. Greymarch, meanwhile, had undergone radical reformation. The old council was gone, replaced by an elected body with term limits and transparency requirements. Maris had been elected to it, the former elder who'd warned Arden about the broker, who'd chosen courage over complicity. She sent regular letters detailing the progress and challenges of building something new from corrupted foundations. On the anniversary of Matthias's death, Arden climbed to the highest point of the ruins, the place where she'd first discovered the chamber with the glowing runes. Kale walked with her, but gave her space when they reached the top. Arden stood alone, looking out at the land that had tried to kill her and instead had made her stronger than she'd ever imagined. "I did it," she said aloud, as if Matthias could hear. "I cleared your name, exposed the corruption, built something better in its place." Her voice caught. I miss you every day, but I'm okay now, more than okay. I'm alive in ways I never was before. The wind carried her words away. She stood there for a long time, remembering, grieving, honoring. Then she turned and walked back to where Kale waited. Ready? He asked. For what? There's someone here to see you, says it's important. They descended to the settlement where a young woman waited in the council hall, maybe 20 years old, with fierce eyes and hands marked by recent burns. Are you Arden Vale? The girl asked. I am. I found something. In the southern wastes. Ruins, like yours. And inside, the girl held out her hand and yellow light flickered across her palm. I don't understand what's happening to me, but people said if anyone could help, it would be you. Arden felt something shift in her chest. Recognition, possibility, the sense of a larger pattern emerging. Another source found. Another person transformed by desperation and ancient power. She smiled and gestured to a chair. Sit down. We have a lot to talk about. As the girl began her story, Arden caught Kael's eye across the room. He raised an eyebrow. This is going to complicate things. She nodded slightly. I know, but it's worth it. Because this was what they'd built Vale's Rest for. Not just as a sanctuary, but as a place where people with power could learn to use it responsibly. Where strength served protection rather than domination. Where the scared and desperate could find guidance instead of exploitation. The work would never truly be finished. There would always be new threats, new corruptions, new people who needed help. But that was fine. Arden Vale had been cast into the wilderness to die. Instead, she'd discovered that the harshest places could forge the strongest foundations. That loss could become purpose. That exile could become liberation. She'd survived when they wanted her erased. She'd thrived when they wanted her broken. And she'd built something beautiful from the ruins they'd tried to bury her in. She was living proof that endings could become beginnings, that the discarded could become indispensable, that in the coldest, darkest places, power and purpose and even love could be rebuilt from nothing, stronger than before. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the land in white. But inside Vale's Rest, fires burned bright and warm. People gathered, stories were shared, the future was planned, and Arden Vale, once condemned to obscurity, now sat at the heart of it all, not as a ruler, but as a beacon, a reminder of what was possible when you refused to surrender to the narrative others wrote for you. The widow they couldn't bury had become the foundation they couldn't ignore, and her story was just beginning.